Welcome to the Inclusion in Action webinar series. This is part 2 of our series on dyslexia. This evening's webinar is brought to you by Porto Charities Center for Learning and Leadership, which we launched in March of this year. I'm Maureen Ashby. I'm the director of the center, and we have with us Carmen Chiappetta, who is the outreach coordinator for Porto Charities. The center was launched in order to bring all of the wonderful education initiatives that Porto has had over the years into one place under one umbrella. So we still include and still take care of school grants, teacher development, leadership development, and then educational outreach, which are things like this webinar this evening. As you all know, Porto's long-standing mission has been to support within the Diocese of Arlington Catholic education and employment initiatives which serve those with disabilities, and to foster engagement with the general community with events and experiences for people of all abilities. So now we're going to move on to the main event. Tonight will be led by Maura Locke. Maura Locke is the founder of Locked On Learning and provides Orton Gillingham-based multisensory structured language therapy for students who are struggling with reading, handwriting, spelling, composition, or study skills. Maura is a certified academic language therapist, a dyslexia specialist, and a licensed teacher. Maura is a former colleague of mine at Holy Spirit School in Annandale, Virginia, and in my opinion, the epitome of a lifelong learner. And she is a dedicated professional, bar none. I know we are all looking forward to learning from her expertise in this area this evening. So Maura, I'm going to go ahead and turn it all over to you.
I will share my screen here. Okay. So last week we were blessed to hear Sophie's wonderful experiences and the lived experience as a student with dyslexia and now an adult with dyslexia. And I bring a different perspective now. I'm a classroom teacher and a parent, and also a dyslexia specialist now, a dyslexia interventionist. I work with students one-on-one in my home and in private schools, mostly Catholic schools. So again, Mrs. Ashby, I always call her Mrs. Ashby. Mrs. Ashby was my principal. So here's my home office here. I'm speaking from here. My little student, Vivi, I had her this afternoon. She's quite tickled to be featured in this little thing. I love working as a certified academic language therapist because it's my passion to work one-on-one with students and help them overcome their learning challenges and help them overcome the struggles that dyslexia presents to them. So without ado, this is my husband and myself and our 3 beautiful grandchildren. We raised 4 children in this area. We sent them to Holy Spirit. And then they graduated from Bishop Ireton and Paul VI because, they couldn't just settle on one. We had to do 2. Wonderful, wonderful high schools. We've been so blessed to raise our children in the Diocese of Arlington. All right, this is my guiding principle. When we know better, we do better. So I don't know, about 15, 18 years ago, when I first decided to start this journey to become a teacher, I enrolled at Marymount University, excellent university, and I did the career switcher program. So it was a 2-year master's in education, and I worked very hard, and I was so motivated to become the best teacher I could be for my students. And I worked very hard with professional development and reading widely. And I really thought I knew when I became a 3rd grade classroom teacher how to teach all the subjects. But what I had realized soon after, and maybe like within a year or 2, is that 2 years in a master's program is not enough to really fully understand how to properly teach reading, especially to students who are struggling. Okay, so when we know better, we do better. I did my best then. Now, we all know better. We know so much more about structured literacy. which is sort of the program now, or the umbrella term that we use for properly teaching students, all students, not just students with dyslexia, all students, how to learn to become competent readers. All right, so today we're going to cover definition of dyslexia, recognizing the signs, the strengths, which Sophie so brilliantly and beautifully embodied in her presentation last week, and some practical classroom strategies. What is dyslexia? Dyslexia is the most common language-based learning disability. It affects how the brain processes written and spoken language. It has nothing to do with how hard a student is working, nor how intelligent they are. Estimates show that between 10 and 20% of the population show signs for dyslexia. The IDA revised their definition in 2025, and their definition is that dyslexia is a specific learning disability characterized by difficulties in word recognition and or spelling that involve accuracy, speed, or both, and vary depending upon the orthography, which is the written system of our language with all of the spelling conventions. And these difficulties occur along a continuum of severity and persist with instruction that is effective for the individual's peers. So that idea of continuum, if you see that, dyslexia can have a mild presentation, and dyslexia with a student can have a very severe presentation. I have been working in the classroom. I worked, so maybe over my 15, 18 years of working with students, I have seen students who their only difficulty has been in the spelling. Okay, they're reading, they read more slowly than their peers, but the dyslexia hasn't been really caught or really noticed until middle school when they struggled so greatly with spelling. And then I've had a fifth grade student, it breaks my heart, who came to me, fifth grade Fairfax County student who could not read or spell her own first and last name. So her classroom teacher would write on her hand in Sharpie her name. Why did she have to do this? Because when she went to the cafeteria, she couldn't pull her lunch card, so that the cafeteria ladies could pull her lunch card. Now, she had a 3-syllable first name and a 3-syllable last name, so it's not like it was Jane Smith. But, that was such a case of um, negligence on the part of the school system, honestly. And they are paying for it now. That student is now at the lab school being sent by Fairfax County. So those things happen. So it is a continuum. Very mild presentations, very severe presentations, but also it's not just the presentations. We also have to look at, and this is what Sally Shaywitz says in Overcoming Dyslexia, which we'll talk about later, how hard is the student working to decode? Even if they're decoding somewhat accurately or pretty accurately, we have to look at the effort process that they have to put in to be able to decode those syllables. All right, what does this mean in practice? Dyslexia is one of the recognized characters of a learning disability. It's not a general intelligence issue, and it's not the same as a broader learning delay. So yes, there are learning delays, kids that take longer to learn how to do things. There were developmental delays. Kids take longer to physically develop, but it's a specific learning disability. It's word reading and or spelling. The core difficulty is at the word level. So before dyslexia was a term, it was called word blindness. So like 150 years ago, that's what they first termed it, as word blindness, the inability to understand how to read individual words. Again, the continuum of severity, and it persists despite good instruction. So that's important. A lot of times, especially in Fairfax County, they might have difficulty sort of actually admitting or acknowledging that somebody has dyslexia because they say, well, the student has been moved around a lot or has come from a different country and does not have, there's no evidence of good instruction. So despite good instruction, despite a very sound classroom instruction or homeschooling instruction, the student is still having difficulty. All right, it's not a vision problem. And I know somebody before it submitted a question. Yes, students can have difficulty with tracking. There are vision problems, certainly, But vision problems are not the same as dyslexia. So students don't see the letters backwards. They might name the letters backwards. It's a language problem, not a vision problem. Okay. It's not laziness or low effort. It is not a sign of low intelligence. In fact, a student would have to have an average or above average intelligence to be defined with, to be diagnosed with dyslexia. And it's not something a child outgrows. And so many of my parent families, they're hoping that their student will outgrow it, that we can cure it. And dyslexia is something that a student and then an adult lives with. They certainly can overcome many of the challenges and they can learn to read more fluently, but it is not something that you outgrow. All right, let's first look into recognizing the characteristics. All right, the big characteristic that we're going to look for is slow or effortful, inaccurate reading of single words. Okay, that is where the pedal hits the metal. Students, I have found, will do much better reading connected text. And what I mean by connected text, I'm talking about a book, fiction or nonfiction, paragraphs. Okay, especially ones with pictures that they can, that they have some clues about what's going on in the page. A student's going to do a lot better because so many students, they're very bright and they're going to use all the tools at hand and they're going to use context clues to be able to decode that passage. And certainly they might be able to silently read something, make their way through it, and answer questions. But if you give them a list, especially a list of non words that they've memorized, those are single words and I don't know, instead of fun, fen, something like that, where you actually have to see evidence of them decoding. That's where you're really going to be able to recognize that this student has not really mastered, has not broken the code, has not learned how to decode. They skip, add, or mix up the small words, especially the small words. They'll often substitute, for the. They avoid reading out loud and reading in general. What I find with my students is um, when things get hard, as I'm working one-on-one with students, suddenly their foot hurts. They need a tissue. They need a drink of water. They need to go to the bathroom. You classroom teachers are going to find exactly the same thing. Those students are going to count and see when they're going to be called on to read, and they're going to figure out exactly when they need to ask to go to the nurse or the bathroom to get out of that ask. They have difficulty sounding out unfamiliar words. They lose their place easily and reread lines. And I understand that sometimes people view that as a vision problem. And again, dyslexia has so many different presentations and people with dyslexia have so many different challenges. I had a student I worked so hard with and she could decode and she understood all the rules and she understood the syllable types and but she also had, of course, students with dyslexia have other challenges too. And a lot of students with dyslexia, you'll find a co-occurrence of attention deficit. And so, that can make tracking across the line very, very difficult. But she's constantly was losing her place or rereading lines. That's definitely a characteristic of a student with dyslexia. And the reading comprehension is lower than the listening comprehension. In spelling, you're going to find the same thing, difficulty with letter formation. Spelling doesn't match how the word sounds. One of my students, when in doubt, if he didn't know how to spell a vowel, it was always OU. Everything was OU. But they spell the same word differently within one piece of writing. So you're going to find that in reading and writing. Reading with a student just this week, and we're reading Scamp Takes a Bath, and we decoded on the cover Scamp. And we tapped out the sounds, and we sounded it out, and we talked about that it was capitalized because it was the name of somebody. We really looked at that word. And then when he encountered that word scamp on every page for the next 5 pages, each time he needed to decode that word. He each time it was like meeting, as Sophie said, it's like meeting somebody new or again and again and again, because he could not commit that to memory and retrieve that. In spoken language, you're going to find people with dyslexia have trouble finding the right word quickly, word retrieval. It's right at the tip of their tongue. They might say something like, oh, yes, I heard there was a volcano warning today. they're trying to say a tornado warning at school. So they're mixing up words. It's a word retrieval issue. They have difficulty learning and recalling rhymes or song lyrics, which can point to a deficit in phonemic awareness. Okay, students with dyslexia usually have a deficit in the phonological component of language. All right, they don't understand how sounds make up syllables and how the syllables make up the words. They can't hear the individual sounds, especially consonant blends, and they have difficulty segmenting these sounds and then blending the sounds together. They're slow at naming letters, numbers, or colors rapidly. They mix up sounds in multisyllabic words, like animal might be manimal or biscotti, or, graphome, for grapheme, something like that. And they struggle to memorize sequences, days, months, math facts, which is kind of funny, but I find myself spending a fair amount of time at the beginning or the end of my lessons trying to teach my students how to read a clock, and the days of the week in sequence, the months of the year in sequence, and the seasons. Sequences are very difficult. It can also show up in math and organizational skills. They confuse arithmetic signs, they transpose digits, and again, the difficulty with the clocks. Now, Sophie did a beautiful job last week of highlighting the strengths that are seen along dyslexia. Big picture thinking, problem solving, verbal expression, and resilience. Resilience is the one I want to talk to, this grit, this leaning in. And I remember when I worked for Mrs. Ashby, and I forget the name of the book, maybe she could put it in the chat. We read a book one summer about how resilience, the ability to lean in when things get hard, not give up, is so important to a student. And we see this with so many successful people who have dyslexia, that those challenges didn't defeat them, didn't overcome them, that they just leaned in, worked harder, and they learned that, oh, it's okay, I'm going to make mistakes. All right, it's okay, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not perfect. It's okay to take risks, and I can do this. All right, I can do this if I just work and apply. So I'll share on a personal note here. I have 4 children, and my first two children learned how to read like it was breathing. They devoured books so easy. And then my third child struggled and received extra help. And luckily for us, fortunately for us, she was enrolled in a Catholic school, because at that time in Fairfax County, it was a more whole language curriculum. But the Catholic schools have always sort of focused on phonics for teaching. And so she had enough phonics that she overcame it. I had no idea what dyslexia was when she was going through it. She's in her 30s now. And then my fourth child really had difficulty. Did I even know the name dyslexia? I didn't. But now what I find is now, many years later, that both of my youngest two children, they have a certain resilience. Okay, school did not come easily to them. They've worked very hard. My daughter, who struggled so much through elementary school and middle school, she went on to do a nursing degree at Georgetown University and is doing fabulously well. Much like Sophie, just she had to work harder. And my son, again, this sense of resilience, this I'm not going to give up, I'm going to work harder. That is so important. It really is important. All right, successful people with dyslexia, there's so many, too many to name. I have St. Joseph of Cupertino, a wonderful man who had a lot of difficulty with learning challenges. And so he was told at first, well, you're not really up to becoming a priest or a brother. But he became the patron saint of those with learning disabilities, because his faith and his persistence and his ability to just try his hardest and believe. Okay, it was his belief that this is what he was meant to do. Agatha Christie is an author. Now, who would think that Agatha Christie had dyslexia? Okay. Richard Branson is an entrepreneur. He credits his dyslexia for making him an innovative problem solver. Carol Greider was a Nobel Prize in medicine. Albert Einstein. One of my favorite examples of a successful person with dyslexia is the children's author, Patricia Polacco. As a third grade teacher, she used to be one of my author studies. She did not learn to read until she was 14 years old. Um, that is an incredible, because it takes a long time to overcome that amount of deficit. I mean, so she was able to sort of get by school enough to be promoted, but really couldn't read until a teacher. And I feature here, it says, "Thank you, Mr. Falker." Her teacher's name begins with an F. Begins with an F. I forget what it was. She changed the name. But this is a true story of how a teacher, when she was I think a freshman in high school, took the time to figure out what was going on with her, and helped her by researching different techniques that would help her, by also paying out of his own pocket to hire specialists. And then she learned how to read and write, and she's a master storyteller. And I really, really recommend it for a lot of, if your parents, you have young children, these picture books are phenomenal. All right, key indicators. What are we looking for in preschool? In preschool, we're looking for delayed speech or persistent mispronunciations. Now, does this mean that every preschooler who has delayed speech has dyslexia? No, it's not a direct causation here. What we're saying is that it is an indicator. It's something that if your student, if your little preschooler has a delayed speech, it's something to watch out for. Certainly, my youngest did not speak until he was maybe 3.5. He was in child fine, so he had delayed speech. I did not realize back then that that was an indicator. Difficulty recognizing or producing rhymes. Again, we're going to talk about that deficit in the phonological component of language. Deficit, difficulty with understanding that the letters map the sounds. Okay, difficulty recalling names of letters, trouble learning letter names, trouble sequencing the days. In elementary school, we're looking at difficulty connecting the letters to their sounds. Again, it's that alphabetic principle. Understanding. So many dyslexic students, they might look at that like that we're supposed to memorize every single word. Okay, they don't understand how the letters, the graphemes, represent the sounds, and how the sounds blend into a syllable, and how the syllables combine to form words, and how words are combined to form sentences. They rely on guessing or pictures instead of decoding. They spell the same word on the same page differently. Okay, they'll like the and said and any, list, anything. They don't understand how, so every time it's like encountering something new. All right, but reading is slow and effortful and inconsistent. That idea that it's slow is something that's going to continue through this presentation. That is one of the biggest red flags, because slow reading indicates that it's taking a lot of effort for a student to decode that syllable. Okay. Now, if you remember back to Sophie's presentation, and we saw that wonderful graphic of the lazy river, it's only milliseconds longer or seconds longer than a neurotypical student. But that's all it takes to slow the process down and to make reading very, very difficult for the student. And even when students are able to decode, we have to look at the effort involved in that decoding, okay? Because if they're working 3 or 4 times harder and their reading is so much slower, then even those students can be diagnosed with dyslexia. They certainly avoid reading aloud or reading related tasks. In teens and adults, the same thing. What you're going to find is they're going to avoid assignments or careers that require a lot of heavy reading. They're often undiagnosed. Their spoken vocabulary is stronger. They're definitely going to use Audible, things like that to listen, which is something as my eyes age. I really love Audible. They mispronounce names or trip over parts of words, and they read accurately, but much slower than their peers. So maybe a 6th or 7th grade student might read 150, 170 words a minute. My students with dyslexia, I'm lucky if by the time we finish the program, they're reading between 50 and 75 words a minute. That's considered a success. It's still slow. Dyslexia isn't cured. What we do is we work to maximize the best reading that they can do. Okay, the the most accurate reading and the most fluent reading, but that's still going to be much slower than the neurotypical peer. All right, now in a school setting, a best practice would be a universal screening. And a universal screening would mean they're going to take all the kindergartners at the end of kindergarten year, and they're going to administer Dibbles or PALS or the Shaywitz dyslexia screener. And from that screener, now they can identify the students who look like they might need further attention. They might be placed in small groups. That's a universal screener. Another type of screening would be when a student is individually referred to the resource department. Hey, this classroom teacher or the parent is concerned. Can you please screen them? Screening is done in the classroom. It can be done by a reading specialist, a resource staff, a classroom teacher. And it tells you that a further evaluation is warranted. What is a diagnosis? A diagnosis is a comprehensive formal evaluation that identifies the nature of the difficulty. And who conducts it? A qualified evaluator, a psychologist, a neuropsychologist, a speech pathologist. It's a formal determination that can qualify a student for classroom accommodations and structured literacy support. So within the school system, in the public schools, there's a universal screening. Students will be identified. And even the school system will identify students who are eligible to receive special education services. They'll eligible for small group structured literacy supports. In the Catholic schools, most times a student is required to have a diagnosis of a reading disability, or even better, a specific reading disability that is dyslexia, in order for them to receive accommodations. So that's something to think about, that accommodations are available after your child has been formally evaluated and diagnosed. All right, how dyslexia is diagnosed. Okay, you can go to a private practice. You can go to George Mason. I guess they have some affiliated clinics. And a formal clinical evaluation is necessary to confirm a dyslexia diagnosis. Now, what a clinical evaluation should include. So a clinical evaluation, a private one, is expensive, and you need to be an informed consumer because you're paying for this as a parent. It should include a cognitive ability test, an IQ test. An example would be the WISC-5. It should include a test of reading ability, decoding of both real words and nonsense words. It should include an oral reading fluency measure, both single word lists and connected texts. That just means paragraphs, okay? It should also include a test of phonological processing, which an example of that would be the CTOP, rapid naming, phonemic awareness. It should include vocabulary and comprehension assessments. And also there should be a brief assessment of mathematics with both calculation and word problems. Again, when you're going, if you decide, if your student is screened and identified that there might be a problem, and the school recommends a formal evaluation, and you decide to go outside, the school, and you decide to find an evaluation. There are big practices. There are small, a psychologist who would offer this, but you should ask, just because it's the best price, is it the best idea for your student? How many times has this professional worked with students with learning disabilities? Is this something that, is he a family practice person who is also offering this assessment? You want somebody skilled in diagnosing dyslexia. You want somebody who understands what he's doing. You want all of these assessments. Okay, you don't want just pieces. I'm going to talk about the pieces bit later here. All right. You can work with a school. So you have the option as a parent, okay, to obtain a private clinical evaluation, which can, as we know, be very expensive. But you can also work with your Fairfax County or Loudoun County school system. Public school testing is free to all families. Parents write to the neighborhood public school. You have to put it in writing. You note your concern about your child's progress and you request an evaluation. Oh, well, couldn't my Catholic school do that? No. Okay, they're not the same requirements, and the Catholic school are not able to provide these types of assessments. So you can work with the public school. You can put it in writing. You can say that I'm concerned. You probably it's even better to submit paperwork from your school. Oh, the student is not meeting benchmarks. The student is struggling with phonemic awareness. The student is struggling to name her letters. The public school then will call you in. So once they receive that letter, the clock is ticking, and they have a certain time frame to get back to you. And then you're going to have an eligibility meeting where you're called in. I've gone in as a private dyslexia specialist with families. I've also gone in as a resource teacher when I worked at Holy Spirit. And it's even better if you can have a teacher from your school come with you to this eligibility meeting to clearly explain what the concerns are. Because everything is data driven, especially in the school system. If you have the Bible score, if you have oral reading fluency measures that show that the student is well below grade level expectations, those kind of assessments are going to speak the language that the Fairfax County School or the Loudoun County School needs to hear. Okay, that this concern is a valid concern. And then in that eligibility thing, well, so I guess the first meeting might not be called eligibility. It's just a meeting to see if the Fairfax County School finds that there's enough evidence to test. And then if they decide that, and in every case, every meeting I've been in, they always agree to test. But here's the rub. So when they're testing, they're not going to do all those batteries that we saw, those 6 things. They're going to, like in the WISC-5, they might just take certain parts of it. In the CTOP, they're going to take certain parts because they are not mandated to do a full clinical diagnosis. Instead, a school, what they're trying to determine is your student, is your child eligible to receive special education services? That's different than your student necessarily being diagnosed with a specific learning disability. Now, usually, their finding will indicate a specific learning disability. Rarely will they use the term dyslexia. They're just concerned with not 100%, not under a microscope. What are your students' strengths and weaknesses? They want to find out as quickly as they can whether this student qualifies for special education services. If the determination is that the student does indeed qualify, then you can take that paperwork back to your Catholic school, and that kind of a determination is usually enough to allow or to provide accommodations for your student in that classroom. What are those accommodations could be? Certainly extra time on a task, a quiet area to take an assessment. It also might involve with a student exemption from a foreign language class, because students with dyslexia, they struggle to learn to read and write English. Well, they're going to struggle even more so to learn to read and write French or Spanish or Latin. All right. The next steps after a positive result. So you've had a private evaluation, you received a diagnosis, or the school system identified a specific learning disability. You want to share the evaluation report with the school and request the accommodations through an IEP if you're in a public school, or a 504, or a student assistance plan. And that's the terminology used in a Catholic school. You want to confirm that every accommodation that was recommended is in the written plan. And parents and teachers should clearly understand that the accommodations or modifications, what they are, that they're in their plan. So here's what's happened. Oftentimes, this process happens sort of mid-year, but certainly in the beginning of the year, when your student starts with a new grade level and a new teacher, the teacher is going to look at those accommodations, but September and the end of August and September is a very busy time. So they're going to do their best to remember. It's best practice for you as a parent to occasionally check in with that teacher and say, "Hi, Mrs. Smith, my child is so excited to be in your classroom this year. And I'm just wondering if there's anything I can do to support you. And I was wondering how, the accommodations that are in her plan are working out. Are they challenging? Is it easy for her to receive?" Just what you're trying to do is very, very gently and politely um, remind the teacher, okay, that your child has dyslexia and needs accommodations to be successful in the classroom. Okay. As far as the classroom teacher point of view, I was in the same boat as a classroom teacher. In September, the resource team comes and you meet, but then certainly in October, when things slow down, you need to go back to those plans and you need to reread those plans. Oh, who needs what? It might be great underneath at your podium up at the front. Have a list of, your students with special learning accommodations. Don't write their names on it. You might have A, B, C, D. Write the accommodations and leave them, underneath your calendar or your notes or something so that they can be easily looked at and reminded. Okay, you want to keep those accommodations at the top of your mind. You want to start structured literacy support. So you want to begin an evidence-based multisensory Orton-Gillingham program. Providers include, okay, school-based classroom programs like Super Kids, okay? Most of our Catholic schools, many of our Catholic schools have moved toward these boxed programs designed for the classroom that are based with structured literacy. And structured literacy means that you're teaching the language directly. Okay, you're not assuming anything. You're teaching the alphabetic principle. You're teaching that the sounds are mapped with letters, and the letters represent the sounds, and that the sounds are combined to make syllables, and the syllables are combined into words, and the words are written in sentences. Now, in addition to school-based classroom programs, you have the option of hiring private dyslexia specialists like myself. My area is a certified academic language therapist. I did 2 years of specialized coursework, and then I completed a 700 hour supervised practicum. There's also IMSE trained certified teachers. I believe in the diocese now that they're using IMSE to come in and train, hold grade levels of teachers. You can also get a Wilson trained teacher or a tutor or a Barton trained tutor. There are Orton Gillingham tutors. There, you don't find too many of the actual Orton Gillingham. There's no physical site where they're training. I have visited down in Richmond where they have fellows there. There is, or there are several now, what do you call it? Web-based programs that also use that. So Orton Gillingham is not a specific school and it's not a specific curriculum. Orton Gillingham is an umbrella term for a methodology. Okay, it's not a specific thing, and nobody owns that Orton Gillingham. It just refers to, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You want to build support at home. You want to establish consistent reading routines, especially if your student is struggling and is reading very, simple text. You want to be at home reading the very rich chapter books and the beautiful picture books because you want to continue to build that vocabulary. The vocabulary that we use when we speak is at one level, but the vocabulary contained in beautiful picture books and in chapter books is at the next level. And that's what you need to expose your child to. And then what you need to do is you need to make sure that the teachers track the progress. All right, monitor and track progress. All right, this is the book that I really, really recommend. If you can read one book, this Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. It's a great book. This is the revised one. It's speaking to the parent, And so I think, for the parents there, but it's also very useful for the teachers, all about the characteristics of dyslexia and how to diagnose dyslexia and then how to overcome, how to remediate. So I really, really recommend this one. Now, what you want to do is if you decide to hire a private dyslexia specialist or tutor, again, you want to be an informed consumer. You need to verify their credentials. What I have found is that price doesn't necessarily indicate training. That I have seen, private people who have no specific dyslexia training charge $100 or $150 an hour but they haven't had the training. So you want to make sure that that you've vetted, that you've checked the credentials of anyone that you hire. You want to see if they have a structured literacy certification, like a CALT, like IMSE, like Wilson or Barton. You want to see that they have dyslexia specific training, not general tutoring. There's a difference. You want to see evidence of a supervised practicum, and you certainly would like to check into references. All right. And again, on here, questions to ask. How are you going to measure report progress? How long are the sessions? And how do you coordinate with the school and the teachers? Okay, what teachers can do. All right, structured literacy. It's explicit. The concepts are directly taught. We never assume that the students know anything. We make sure that everything is directly, explicitly, clearly taught. We leave nothing to chance, nothing to be inferred. That the program used is systematic and cumulative. That means that you build the skills in a planned sequence, that you have a scope and sequence that is organized, that makes sense, that you can explain to the parent or to the school, that it's diagnostic. Instruction is responsive, adjusting to what each student needs, and then it's multisensory, which means that we're using all of the different pathways that. So when I'm working with a student, we use skywriting, right, to write the letters. We use desk writing. We write in a sand tray. We use little manipulatives to have the students, identify the objects that have something to do with the keywords that we associate with vowel sounds and with consonant sounds. Multisensory, we have the student say it as they're reading it, as they're writing it, as they're hearing it. The Orton-Gillingham methodology, as I mentioned before, it was developed in the 1930s by neuropsychiatrist Dr. Samuel T. Orton and an educator, a teacher named Anna Gillingham. And they broke language down into its smallest components and they taught the rules of English directly, making it one of the most widely used approaches for students with dyslexia. The OG methodology is useful for a lot of for the whole class. It's if it's taught, like especially like at a super kids program, there are classroom programs that use this sort of methodology, and it's very successful. The thing is, if your student has a moderate or severe presentation of dyslexia, they might also require the one-to-one private dyslexia interventionist. All right. Strategies. So in the classroom, what are you going to do? You're going to pre-teach the vocabulary before lesson so that decoding isn't the only new demand on attention. The way I look at that, so a student with dyslexia, you think about like a stove and there are like back burners and front burners. And the thing is that a student with dyslexia is so busy decoding those words that everyone else already knows. Everybody else, for the decoding has already been moved to the back burner. Okay. What you need to do is you need to provide them with as much background knowledge, okay, before you start a reading task so that they're not, they're going to be struggling, but pre-teaching the vocabulary will really help them understand what's going on. Okay. Provide audiobooks or text to speech. Use decodable systematic phonics texts. Okay. Decodable text. This can be a little controversial. I know some people say, oh, well, those are boring. My students, my child feels like that's a baby book. And they want their children reading chapter books as soon as possible. Okay. when your student is learning to play soccer or learning to swim, do you put them right in with the A meets? You don't. Okay. You have to start, you meet the student where they are. You have to start at the beginning and have faith that a structured sequential program will teach them what they need to move them along. If you continue to try to present texts that are too difficult for the student, they're not going to learn how to read. They're not going to learn how to decode. They're not going to learn how to break the code. All right. What they're going to do is they're going to learn, it's really going to become part of them to guess words, look at a first letter and grab a word. They're going to do everything they can. Now, can you read with them? Yes, definitely. Please, we want you to read with them. But there's definitely a place for decodable systematic phonics texts. Okay, those are what your student is learning to read in, and then you're reading the chapter books and the beautiful picture books with them. But you have to allow the extra time for reading tasks because it takes so much more effort for a dyslexic student to read. And above all else, the most important thing for a teacher to remember is avoid calling on students who have a reading disability, or avoid calling on them to read aloud, okay? Because that is anxiety producing. And I've had more discussions with families who are very upset. So that's where the classroom teacher, if a student is diagnosed with dyslexia, they're going to see one of the accommodations is going to be listed, no reading aloud. Now, unless they volunteer, eventually they might feel more confident and raise their hand. Certainly, I was working with a third grade student this year, and his class was reading Charlotte's Web, and he was at the end of the program with me. And what we would do is, when I met with him, we would read the chapter that he was going to read in classroom the next day. So he felt more prepared, and he would volunteer to read. When they're prepared, the anxiety will come down, and they will volunteer when they feel safe in your classroom. Writing and spelling support. Again, allow typing, dictation, speech to text. Grade content and spelling separately. And I know, this is a difficult thing because in the Catholic schools, it's a very high level of accountability. It's a very challenging curriculum, but we have to allow for our students diagnosed with dyslexia a little extra leeway with regard to spelling. They're working on it. They're working on it. Provide graphic organizers and sentence starters to help reduce the working memory load of organizing the writing. Offer copies of notes or slides. That's very helpful. And teach spelling patterns explicitly rather than assigning a long word list. So we don't need, for them to memorize the first, 20 words of the Dolch sight words. That's not a good, but to teach them, this week we're going to be focusing on R controlled vowels, and we're going to really focus on AR, star R words, and perhaps compare them to OR, fork, or words. Teaching the spelling patterns explicitly, clearly, that is going to be very, very useful for your student. All right, so one example, whenever I'm working with a student and I want them to start a writing task, we'll do a map organizer. We'll just sort of throw it on a whiteboard, the main idea. Then we'll brainstorm, some characters, the setting, whatever it takes. But drawing it out and letting them work on that whiteboard, it brings the anxiety down. It helps them move some of those things to the back burners so that they can just focus on what they need to get the writing assignment started. All right, classroom environment and materials. Break multi-step directions down into smaller chunks. Now, this would benefit the entire classroom. Use clear, uncluttered font and layout on worksheets and slides. Avoid dense text blocks and busy backgrounds. Provide consistent routines and a visual schedule. Certainly, we've been in classrooms where we've seen, some students will have something taped to their desk. Their pack up routine, or their unpacking routine, their morning routine. Hey, is your lunch in the lunch bin? All those type of things are helpful for a student who has so much going on. There's so many demands on this student that we need to make things as organized, as predictable, as routine, as safe and is comfortable for them. All right. So here's an example of so in third grade, I used to teach the water cycle. And now here's this really fun, it's beautifully illustrated, but it's a very busy worksheet. Okay, so some of my students, okay, would be able to understand everything that was going on then. But there are some students who might just need this much more clearly laid out water cycle. And you see at the bottom, they're actually going to be cutting it and pasting it on. Now, you could do a couple different things. The students, you could, if you think that they can write the words, you can cut the bottom off, okay, and have them write the word themselves or have them copy it. Okay, but what you're doing is you want them to understand the content, you want them to understand the concept of the water cycle, and you're going to take away all of these words that are going to get in that way. Okay, this student, if they can actually put those things in order, they're learning the concept of the water cycle. Okay, and that's what they need to do. They are not going to be, it depends. If they're 2 years below grade level, they can't handle the water cycle with the busy thing, but they could handle a very clearly, neatly presented sheet that would help them understand the nuts and bolts of what's most important. Okay, assessment and testing accommodations. Provide extended time on tests and assignments. That's very, very important for students with dyslexia. Allow oral responses or scribing when the goal is to assess content knowledge. Read the test questions aloud when appropriate. I definitely found as a classroom teacher that I thought it was appropriate, that it benefited my whole class to read the test questions aloud. Reduce visual clutter on test pages and check in on comprehension separately from fluency to see what a student understands, not just how fast they read. What you want to do is you want to highlight their strengths openly and often so a student isn't identified or defined by reading struggles. You want to frame the accommodations as tools, not special treatments. You want to give specific effort-based praise, and you want to watch for signs of anxiety or avoidance. Anxiety, just like I said, attention deficit is often associated or often occurs with the students who have dyslexia, school anxiety, generalized anxiety, and avoidance can build as the student progresses through the school, because school is just too hard for them. And so what we need to do is we need to create a safe space where they feel comfortable to learn. And you want to communicate regularly with the families. All right, you can't cure dyslexia, but you can support it with structured literacy, early identification, targeted interventions, accommodations, assistive technology, educator training, professional development, which I know Porter Charities is actually, I think, funding a program to train diocesan classroom teachers. That kind of educator training is so important for our students. Again, if we look back at the beginning of the thing, when we know better, we do better. When I first started, and I'll share, I meant to share in the beginning, when I was a teacher, when I first started, I tried so diligently to become the best teacher I could be for my students. I love teaching. I love kids. I love teaching. It's definitely, I feel like, my vocation. And in about, I think it was the second or third year as a classroom teacher, I had a student in class, and she was delightful, respectful, hardworking, motivated. And she was actually the daughter of a colleague, another teacher in the building, my friend. She worked so hard, this young lady, but she was not reading on grade level. And we were in third grade. And most of my kids, okay, 80% of the kids in the classroom when they come into third grade, they can read on grade level. Different, some way above grade level, some right at grade level. But there's always going to be 3 to 4 kids who are struggling. And this little girl was one of the ones who were struggling. And I tried so hard to help her. I would take the group, this young lady and the 2 or 3 others, and I would meet with them daily in small group. And eventually I figured out, I had to teach them how to associate the sounds with the letters because they had not learned that. Even though they had been this great school, okay, they had had wonderful instruction, they had not learned it. They were still struggling. And I realized, oh, even though I had worked very hard and I had a master's in education and I was a licensed state certified classroom teacher, I wasn't able to really teach. Not really. I was not able to teach these students, to really help these students as they needed to be helped. When we know better, we do better. So what did I do? I started to ask around. I started to read. I started to enroll in some professional development. What is going on here? How can I help students who are struggling learn how to read? And then I happened to run into a neighbor whose daughter was a CALT, a certified academic language therapist. And she sort of, opened the world of dyslexia and dyslexia intervention to me. And I learned, oh, okay, a reading disability that can be severe, but it can be mild, and that structured literacy can actually help these students learn how to read, but you have to learn how to teach the language directly, systematically, and cumulatively. You have to keep repeating because a neurotypical student, they're going to see a word 3, 4 times, maybe 2 or 3 times. It's theirs. They own it. Okay. But a student with dyslexia, they're going to need many, many more exposures to that word, maybe as many as 20, maybe a lot more than that. Okay. That student that I work with that ended up at the lab school, we worked on the word the, for 4 months, but she still did not have it at the end. It was, she had a very severe presentation of dyslexia that needed, and that's a very rare case. They said that's like a 1%. Most of the students need the direct, systematic, sequential instruction to start to close the gap, because we have to think about the fact that these students, they're learning the best that they can in the classroom situation, but they're getting further and further behind. All right, so dyslexia is a specific language-based learning disability. It's not a vision problem or a lack of effort. It exists on a continuum and it looks different across reading, writing, oral language, and math. Early identification and structured literacy instruction makes a measurable difference. Okay, this is kind of a big deal. What we've learned is that there are of key indicators of dyslexia even in preschool students. But certainly at the end of kindergarten, a dyslexia screener or a universal screener would be a best practice within a school setting. And certainly at Holy Spirit, that's what we used to identify the students that we have to keep an eye on, okay, that we have to keep an eye on. And then those students might be even further referred to the resource department for additional sort of what I call like tier 2 small group interventions. And then even perhaps for a clinical diagnosis, okay, whether that be with a private clinician or using the available public school services to identify eligibility for special education services. Early identification. If you start working with a first grader or a second grader, the outcome is going to be so much better, because every year that you delay, those students are falling further and further behind their classmates, and it's harder to close the gap. Okay, you want to close the gap. You want to teach them what they need. And when I see students as 6th and 7th graders, we have a long way to go. And they might be a little discouraged when I'm trying to teach them the foundations because they don't understand it. But I basically talk about the fact that we need to trust the process. We have to trust the process. Yes, we're going back to the beginning because we want to build or rebuild that wall and find out where the holes are. Okay. And that in a structured literacy intervention is going to involve teaching the letter sounds correctly, teaching that these sounds are blended into syllables, teaching that the syllables are combined into words, and then teaching spelling rules, and syllable division patterns and all of these things, but not making those rules and those patterns too onerous. Okay. You're teaching those things as they need to be as they need to be taught. Okay. That's what a diagnostic teaching is. What we're doing is we're trying to meet the students where they are and moving them along. Okay. It's certainly easier to start that process in first or second grade. It certainly is easier. Okay, now, so I said early identification. I would definitely recommend, and this is what Sally Shaywitz says, if you are concerned about your student, seeking a clinical evaluation in first or second grade is very appropriate. Okay, it's very, very appropriate. Simple, consistent classroom strategies remove barriers without lowering expectations. And students with dyslexia bring real strength. They support their confidence. So you want to support their confidence as much as their skills. You need to create a safe space in your classroom so that they feel ready and able to take risks, okay, to try to read aloud, all right, and to basically continue and not avoid all of the learning that's going in your classroom by going to the nurse. Okay. All right, there's some resources for parents and teachers. The International Dyslexia Association is a very large nationwide organization, dyslexiaida.org. They have definitions and fact sheets and an IDA dyslexia handbook. The IDA also maintains a provider directory based on geographic location. You can find local structured literacy tutors, evaluators, and specialists. The group that I'm associated with is the Academic Language Therapy Association, alta.org. You can find a certified academic language therapist or a training program. The Atlantic Seaboard Dyslexia Education Center is based out of Maryland. It has OG practitioner training, literary resources, professional development. They have summer camps, and they can help steer you to finding a certified dyslexia specialist. And then the Institute for Multisensory Education, imse.com, Orton Gillingham-based literacy training and professional development for educators. All right, thank you very much. I'll open it up. All right. Okay, do we have questions?
We do. Maura, thank you so much. It was a tremendous amount of information. That was great. So I know in the chat, and Joe Bender, I don't know if you want to jump on. You had several questions in there for Maura, kind of starting back at the top of it. If you would like to ask your questions outright, or I can read them to Maura and she can work through them, however you would like to do that.
Okay, so I've got the chat open here.
Okay.
All right, so Joe Bender says when the definition says vary depending on the orthography, is that implying that languages with closer to one-to-one sound to symbol like Korean tend to have different expressions of dyslexia? Yes. So actually, like Sally Shaywitz says, she's very surprised to see that her book is even being translated into languages that are not, based with an alphabetic language system. Okay, so I know in Korean and Japanese, they're using symbols, kanji and katakana. I know in Japanese, it's a different presentation. I know in Spanish, I don't know too much about Spanish, but I know that each letter has a sound, right? I don't know. Carmen, does somebody here speak Spanish that can tell me? I know. So in Spanish, does A have a long sound and a short sound in Spanish? No. So much easier. Okay, so much easier. Okay, A in English can sound like the naming sound long A. It can have a short sound A. It can say watch and it can say banana All right, so in English, we have 26 letters and 44 to 45 sounds, depending on whether and we won't go into that. So 26 letters, 44 sounds, over 100 different ways to spell those sounds. So yes, English is a complex language to learn. And I would definitely say that that different languages will have different expressions of dyslexia. All right. Mr. Bender, does that answer your question? I don't know if you can unmute.
Yes, it does. I have a 2-year-old running around, so it'll probably be better for me to stay on mute. Uh,
Um,
the next question I had actually built off of that.
sure,
You mentioned that there's a struggle with learning second languages when someone has dyslexia. Is
absolutely.
that compounded by not being in the immersive environment?
Okay. Uh, Carmen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, Joe, we our last webinar that we just held for Portal was called Unlock the Potential, and it was about language learning with students with intellectual disability. And you're spot on with your point, right? So a lot of the problem with the way language is taught in our schools is that it's very grammar based. They're writing, they're reading, but they're not necessarily in the language, they're not acquiring the language. So when you teach for acquisition, that's a very different type of language learning, and that I think is more accessible to everyone. And I do wish that we had more people that would teach for acquisition, because I think that would be something that would be accessible to all of us. The way that it's being taught is largely the barrier, not the language learning itself, if that makes sense.
Understood.
And and that is why I have usually recommended a student with dyslexia is having difficulty learning to read and write, and um, adding this academic task of learning a second language is not something that is going to benefit this student through elementary school and middle school, because it's my belief that they should be focused on learning their first language, English, or their language of the of the school setting, because I understand that there's some second language learners who are in our school. But that would be, and you think about it, the foreign language is usually 30 minutes. It's going to be twice a week at the elementary level and 3 times a week, maybe up to 50 minutes. It's such a small amount of time, but that time, if there are resource uh, teachers available at your school to work with your students, that would be a much better, I think, a much better use of their instructional time. But this varies from school to school. Okay, every school has a different policy. Some schools, um, their students, all students will take the foreign language. It's part of their curriculum. It's part of the diocesan curriculum, and there are no exceptions. But many schools will consider exempting the students from foreign language study while they're still in the weeds. Okay, while they're still learning how to read and write English. Certainly, when they go to high school, are they going to learn a foreign language? Yes, they are. Sometimes the students will learn ASL. I think Sophie learned ASL. I don't know. Is that right, Sophie?
Yes, I took ASL in middle school,
Mm-hmm.
eighth grade year, seventh and eighth grade, and then 3 years of it in high school. So I personally find it a lot easier for me to learn ASL, because it's a very tactile language rather than like ASL, it's American Sign Language. So you don't have to learn about reading or writing in it. We just learned how to speak it and how to communicate and how to actually make the signs rather than like grammar and all of that. The grammar is very easy for ASL. It's very different, and a lot of it is more expression based. So you can have a whole sentence that you might have only two signs with your hands, but half of it is with your face. So that's what I personally loved about it. And a lot of my friends who were in that class were also either dyslexic, had ADHD, had another um, learning difference that they were struggling with, and they chose to take ASL because for them and for me, it's a lot easier for us to grasp and learn it more so.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's wonderful if your student, you know, uh, enters a high school that offers ASL. So O'Connell offered ASL. Yeah, I'm not sure if Bishop Ireton does or Paul the Sixth.
Not many schools do, which is really sad, but I know Gallaudet in DC offers summer classes that can be transferred to high school credits for a language. So I know there's that route. There's also some virtual classes that does ASL. Marymount does ASL classes. There are transfer credits as well. Um, yeah, off the top of my head, that's yeah, those ones.
Great, thank you. All right, so Mr. Bender, I see, would this suggestion, if we have a student who we suspect needs testing for dyslexia, start with the public school to get accommodation started and then follow up with a psychologist or clinic? That wouldn't hurt, especially because sometimes, well, the public schools, I think it's like 120 days. It's not going to be an immediate thing, but I wouldn't say that that there would be any detriment to starting that, to basically starting the process with the public school system. The public school system, again, it's not going to be a clinical diagnosis, but it would definitely provide you with some information. Of course, when you're going into that school meeting, you need to be prepared with data. Okay, you're going to ask your classroom teacher and the resource teachers to type up a little report with information from the screener that was used, with an oral reading fluency measure, with a reading comprehension measure, with a vocabulary test. All of these things are very useful. Progress monitoring measures, so you take a baseline and you track it over time, are very, very informative to see, is this student making progress? Is this student learning? And then also whether the student is 1 year or 2 years behind grade level. Yes, I don't think there would be, if you're going to do the private route, it might be quicker depending on which practice you use, to just contact the private practice and schedule an evaluation. But the public school system, they have a process. You, as a taxpayer, are entitled to use these services. You're going to have your school. Well, you don't have to, but it's best if you have your school on board and helping you. And then most importantly, and I have worked with students before who the parents, in a misguided notion, have not shared the evaluation data with the schools. Whatever you do, if you get some information on your student, please share that with your classroom teacher and the resource teacher. Okay, it's absolutely imperative, because knowledge is power. All right, you really need it. Does that answer your question, Mr. Bender? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
it does. Yes, it
All right.
does.
All right. Monica says testing in Fairfax County is free, and while I doubted their ability to give me a good results, they were good. Okay. The testing from Dr. Ling was written in language that someone who is not an expert can understand. Oh, and that's a really good point here, that I listed those 6 areas of assessment that need to be included in a formal clinical diagnosis. Okay, but the thing is, if you're paying for a private diagnosis, or if you're working with the public school, you need those results interpreted. That's what they're there for. Okay, because that's the level of expertise that they have. They have to interpret those data points and provide a diagnosis, and provide a list of strengths and weaknesses for your student or for your child. It needs to be understandable. Okay, if you just receive a report with just a list of scores, that's not going to help you. You need to understand how your child is doing compared to their peers. Has your child, if it's a school setting, you want to know, has the child been learning, what that curve is looking like. So yes, so thank you for sharing that Fairfax County is free and that they gave good results. That's going to be school dependent. I will tell you, I've worked with some schools that have been very difficult, and I've worked with some fabulous public schools. Just like we're all just people. We're all doing our best, hopefully. And don't get discouraged. If your public-based school that you're working with is very difficult, then you're just going to lean in, you're going to be resilient, and you're going to keep trying harder, because the parent is the primary educator. And it is your mission, okay, it's your God-given mission to to try as hard as you can to get your student the help that they need, to get your child the help that they need. All right, let's see. Okay, let's see. Sophie mentioned struggles with the. Acknowledging everyone's experience is unique. Is the a problem because of the processing? It's not it's not decodable. Okay, it's a sight word. It's not phonetically regular, and it's I don't know why. Especially what they say is the dyslexics, those little words, a and the. Um, Students with dyslexia will often substitute, or switch them around, skip them. It's a marker of dyslexia. It also indicates, they're trying so hard, they're going to skip those little words because in their mind, they're going for the big words that actually have meaning. Okay, okay. So let's see. Spanish is much closer. So are there any other, Carmen?
Is there ever a point at which it's too late? Like, I waited too long. Should I not bother? I have a sixth grader, or is there still value in with an older kid finding out, or like just throw in the towel, don't even bother?
Okay, that is an excellent question. And I certainly, in my little soapbox talking about early identification and early intervention, I do not want to discourage anybody from pursuing a clinical evaluation and or dyslexia intervention when discovered later. So who was it? Charles Schwab, okay, the big finance guy, right? He found out as an adult that he was dyslexic, that he is dyslexic. How did he find out? He was having one of his children tested. Now, does he need to go through a dyslexia intervention program? No, but there are a number of people who find out much later in life. In fact, through my journey here, through my process, my husband is dyslexic. Okay. There's a lot of strengths to that. He's an electrical engineer. He reads so slowly and so carefully. He remembers everything. I read really quickly. My memory is not nearly as good as his. He has a lot of strengths that he brings to the table. His dyslexia brings to the table. His mother had dyslexia. She never finished college. Again, was there a name for her difficulty? No. Was there help for her difficulty? No. But when she was a parent and my husband struggled, she purchased phonics readers. So basically, my husband and I learned in the Dick and Jane period of time. Literally, I remember see Dick run, see Jane run, see Spot, whatever he did. And so what you did was, if you were neurotypical, you were able to infer the patterns. So you were able to see, oh, k is spelled CK at the end of a one syllable word after a short vowel. Not that you would understand, you would be able to articulate that, but you'd be able to, I was able to pick up the patterns. Okay, pick up the patterns. I did not need those patterns directly taught. My husband needed those directly taught. And his mother did that for him. Okay. There was no name to it. I work with students as young as first grade, and I've worked with students in high school. And there's benefit to all. I have one of my trainers, she has volunteered for years with newly released prisoners that come to her house. It's a pro bono work. Come to her house, and she helps overcome their struggles reading. So definitely, if you're not reading, it's a if you're having struggles reading, I would definitely say even in middle school, please go ahead, have that evaluation, and begin an intervention program, because it's never too late. I do want to reiterate that this, it's a guiding principle. When we know better, we do better. When I first started out, I did the best I could. And then, I had a student, my colleague's daughter. I couldn't help her. I started to ask around. I attended professional development, and then I actually began a formal dyslexia training program where I went through a supervised practicum and I took coursework, and we have to do continuing professional development. When we know better, we do better, and that's definitely something that we can do. As a parent, did I know that my two youngest children had dyslexia? I did not. Do I regret? You know what? You can't regret. I did the best I could at that time. I did the best I could, and they're doing well. Of course, I say it was a blessing that they were at Holy Spirit and there was a phonics-based approach to teaching reading. So, we were fortunate there. We were fortunate.
All right. Well, Maura, thank you so very much. You know how much I appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you have. I circle back to my comment at the beginning. If there was any doubt in anyone's mind that Maura is a lifelong learner, I think now she truly is, and she's very passionate about what she does. So we appreciate all the time you spent with us. Sophie, we appreciate all of the time that you spent with us last week as well. This was a beautiful, 2-night session for us this summer. And we appreciate everyone who was here to listen and to learn. And we appreciate all the time and effort that both of you put into to providing us with a little bit more knowledge so we can move forward in very positive ways.